can see this. And as you can see, I'm really not different than you guys are. At that age, I've already lived probably 1,000 years of what the human being can endure. And the reason I say that, oh, thank you, sir. Thank you kindly. Thank you, honey. And the reason I say that is because each minute and each places would be equivalent probably to 10 years. And you'll have to pardon me because I'm sitting, I have a little condition that it's a little difficult for me to stand. So first of all, I want to thank Mr. McNamara here and Bayfield High School and you wonderful students and the unbelievable faculty. "10 years, isn't it, John?" And this is very important to me, as you can understand, if you were, God forbid, in my place, that history like this is never forgotten. And since I'm one of the last of the Mohicans, so to speak, you will probably not see too many of us left. I'm 83 years old. I'm still one of the younger survivors. So you can imagine that most of us are meeting the end. So yes, I accept these for two main reasons. One is this horrible thing that happened is brought to you as many times as I can. And of course for my family who perished in these terrible places. And of course the Holocaust ones that passed away or were murdered in their honor. So the few of us, they can still talk and make a point and bring it out to you kids and folks and adults. You are really witnessing something that's unique. Normally people will come and they'll eat. Normally they will be people who read books and perhaps visited places and touched things and said, I was there, I felt it, I felt the aura, I felt the whole thing. And then they go and present their stories, the books, to students like you and people and say, I was there, I saw how it looked and so on. I was there in the physical, mental agony of a human being. 60 million people perished because of a group of people who I won't even call a government. I call them a clan, a cult that was sold to people who unfortunately didn't either have the education or the will to resist. And this small group of people in Germany were able to kill 60 million people within a period of 7, 8, 9 years. Now let's see what 60 million people represents. Let's go for a trip. Let's say we'll all go for a trip, and we'll start with Ohio, and we'll cross into Indiana. We'll go into Kentucky. We'll go to Illinois. We'll go to Pennsylvania, and up to New York. And while we drive or ride in whatever transportation we use, you won't see one single soul. Not one person. That's what 60 million people represents. That's what this group of maniacs did. Not just for Jews, Christians, gypsies, gays, Muslims, you name it. We got the brunt of it. So, meaning me is the Jews. When this all started, I was 7 years old, 1939, and I was in a ghetto. I was placed in a ghetto when the Germans came to my city in Poland. It's Lodz. City is Lodz, L-O-D-Z. It was a capital of textile, very industrial city, and very cultured city, educated city. And they conquered my city, and we were placed in a ghetto. I'm sure some of you heard what a ghetto is. It was a little different than what we know as a ghetto. A ghetto is when people live of certain ethnic and religious and place, so they call it, we're like kind of in a ghetto. We all live as a unit. This ghetto was created by the Germans to keep us in a special area, surrounded by barbed wire. They built bridges so that we couldn't cross the regular streets because those were for the non-Jews. And so we were like confined in this place, and we worked for the Germans, and the conditions were appalling. We were given very little food. I had to go to work at the age of 7 in a furniture factory so that I could get a coupon so I can get food. So it was still okay in some ways because I was still with my parents. My dad was a concert pianist. I come from 5 generations of music people. Probably goes back to part of the Spanish Inquisition when the Queen told the Jews to leave unless they want to convert to Christianity. And some Jews obviously didn't want to give up their religion, so they were told to leave or they would get killed by the Queen of Spain. And so the Jews began wandering all over Europe, all over whoever would have them. And as my family was wandering, I'm sure, in those times, the country of Poland had a kind king, and he allowed some Jews to migrate there and find a place so they could live. And they were productive, very industrious. So this is how it all evolved, and I was born in Poland. And so going back to the ghetto, I just want to say one thing, you know, and I will be jumping around, kids, because I can sit here for, truly, I can sit here for 5 years and not finish what happened to me and my family and people like me. So I'll be jumping around here a little bit back and forth so I can give you a complete picture of what happened both to me, people that this is the ghetto as you can see. And below is, of course, the normal street and where Gentiles used to walk. We were not allowed to do this, so we had to build bridges so we could cross from one side, like saying you're on this side of Mayfield and you want to cross on the other side of Mayfield. You were not allowed to walk across the street. So they built these bridges, so you had to cross on the way through these bridges. They made everything difficult. But it was still tolerable since I was still with my mother and father and my beloved sister who was 1 year older. And so we lived in the ghetto, we worked for the Germans, and we survived on a daily basis. The ghetto was a place that was also a tortured place in a way, because every time the Germans wanted to punish somebody, everyone had to come out to this place, the main place, they call it the Marktplatz. Marktplatz is like going downtown to the public square. And you had to go out there and observe, listen, and watch what they did to the so-called people who were being punished. They were hung right in front of all these people. They were beaten, and so on. So I kept observing this at the age of 7 and 8 and 9. And at the age of 10, the war was moving against the Germans at the time. Now, Russia was in the war, and of course the United States got involved in 41, I believe. And so the Germans started to try to move us as quickly as possible because they needed labor, and they would take and just move us out of these ghettos, and told us on these places, these public squares, that we're going to Germany. The women should take all the sewing machines, buttons, and needles. And if you were a plumber, bring your tools. If you're a musician, bring your instrument. You're going to work in Germany, and you're going to have a decent life. And so don't worry. The reason they did this, kids, is because a year prior, if you heard of Warsaw, Poland is the capital, they had an uprising, and there was a very, very, very strong resistance between the Gentiles, together with the Gentiles and the Jews, against the Germans. And they had their hands full for 4 weeks. Germans died, a lot of course, fighters died, and naturally there was no way we could overcome the Germans. So they didn't want to repeat performance in our ghetto, which was the Lodz ghetto. So they would tell us, don't worry, you're going there, things will be fine, and do all the things that you'll need when you work for us in Germany. So we had no choice, and so they started moving us towards what I call the cattle wagons. There were wagons that you transport cattle. There's little openings between the wood, no windows. And when we got to the station, the supposedly wonderful trip we were going to go to Germany and work, all of a sudden you saw machine guns, dogs, and hollering and screaming, and they were loading us up into these cattle cars. I believe my car I didn't count, but I couldn't breathe. And they filled the train with our people from the ghetto, and we began a journey to a place called Auschwitz. How many of you heard of Auschwitz before this? Oh, good, good. I'm glad that, so you kind of know where I'm coming from. And the journey in these cattle cars was beyond description as a kid. And since I was your age, I was younger than you are, I still could tolerate certain torturous things. But remember, we were with mothers who had little babies. We had handicapped people who were grandfathers and older people, sick people. And all these people were stuffed into this wagon. And we went on the journey to, we didn't know where, to so-called Germany to work. And I cannot describe what was going on in these wagons to you. People defecating, crying, screaming, vomiting. It was, if you ever read stories of Dante's Inferno, or someone told you, it still wouldn't touch it by this minutest way. So the journey took about 3 days, and finally we get to Auschwitz. And Auschwitz was like nothing you could ever imagine. The minute we pulled in the station, there were Germans on horses, dogs, screaming and hollering to get out of the wagons. They told us to line up. And it was like you've been dropped into a pit of hell. It was like, it's just, you could never you could expect And they started telling women to go on one side, they told men to go on the other side, and all those wonderful things that they told us to bring, of course, we never get a chance to see him or keep him. And they confiscated all that and put it on a mount of clothes and so on, of items and things that we brought. And what we call the inspection process began. The men were on one side, the women were on the other side. And there was this Gestapo man, SS, was the very elite German, loyal to the Reich, to Hitler, and they were in charge of these camps, and they would go left or right. Left meant dead, right meant living. So if you were a kid, you go left. If you were handicapped, you go left. You were sick, left. You didn't look good to work, left. And only the strong and somewhat tall appearances and someone that could be productive too were allowed to go right. The same process took place with the women. And so I'm going to move right along here because I have so much to tell you, and just try to envision this step-by-step journey. So once we passed, I was very fortunate to pass the first inspection because I was sort of tall, and who knows? Was it willed? Was it? I can't tell you. When someone survives a peril of any kind, where people die, and some people survive, whether it's a plane crash or an automobile accident or anything that is tragically unforeseen, you say, well, how come I survived but my son didn't, or my friend didn't, and so on. So there are no answers to that. It's beyond making an opinion on it. So I survived, I went through, I was passed through this line, and I was taken to what we call a shower room, a huge room, which they said they're going to de-lice us. They cut our hair. They gave us uniforms, these little uniforms that you see there with striped uniforms that were made out of burlap material, and a little hat, and they gave us Hollander shoes. If you know what Holland shoes are, they're wooden with a little material over it. And we were marched out of this warehouse, and that warehouse also contained gas chambers, meaning that if you didn't pass, you also went directly into the same area. However, the one that you had chosen to go left, they told you you're going to be in showers, and instead of water, gas came out, deadly gas. And these people just collapsed and died, were removed by workers of the prisoners, and they were taken to the crematoriums and burned to death. So I made it into what we call Birkenau. Birkenau was the main camp, and I can't describe to you what Birkenau was. It was a every time I think of it, as I say to you kids, I'm 83 years old, so I'm very ancient. To this day, I smell the billowing smoke of flesh that was coming out of these huge chimneys day and night, just burning, because our barracks were right next to these so-called ovens. And we were placed into barracks, you probably saw on this chart here, with the bunks, and we were not allowed to go out. We had no toilets, we had no water, we had no heat. We lived like less than any animal that's being tortured. And so, needless to tell you, there were people who were dying right there and then by the hundreds. And each day we were tortured by being told to get out of the barracks, stand there. I left Europe. I left Poland in September, so the winter was starting to come around. And Europe gets a little colder than the United States, especially when you go to Bavaria. Bavaria is the country that borders the Alps and so on. So needless to tell you, there's very, very cold conditions. Anyway, I was in Auschwitz for about 6 weeks and did work. I would take bodies and put them in holes where they were later burned, and that was my job in Auschwitz. And the barracks had no toilets, as I said. People who had to relieve themselves, who just, you had you had diarrhea, you had every kind of disease you can imagine. You're with people who have no doctors, no medication, sick people, and you have to live with them, and ultimately you will get the same problem that they have, and you have to be very strong. Or again, I say to you, why them and not me, or people who survived? And to this day, there are survivors who made it. And when we all get together once in a while and we see each other and we say, how did you survive? I said, well, how did you survive? And there's no answer. And many times people ask, well, what happened to God? What happened to all the things that you were supposed to believe when you were growing up? We didn't have an answer. And some people gave up God. Others took a middle road to it. And others continued to be loyal to their faith. So, but when you talk to someone who is in a survival mode, it's very difficult to talk about, oh well, things happen and oh well. No, it's not oh well. This was planned, and so we were there because it was planned to do what these people wanted to do to us. And the problem and let me say this to you. When you are an adult and you have a family, children, and you already had a job, your life was already well on its way, you were raising your kids and trying to do a good living. And when the same problem happens to a child like me, or kid that's 9, 10 years old, we're in two different worlds. We're not on the same page, and yes, the tragedy is there, but your mode of survival is totally different as a child versus your parents and so on. Because there's nothing that your parents could have done for you. Nothing. They took you away, they separated you, and they went to a women's camp, and you went to a man's camp. So they had no control over you. Even if my father was with me for the first 4 months, and he could not, we tried to cuddle, we tried to help, we tried to whatever, but we weren't allowed. The minute they saw it, we didn't even want to show that we were son and father, because that's one of the things they looked to, was to separate you so that you did not have a family that you could bond to yet to go in the future. So we were always looking to be separated, not to be together, so that there was no saying, well, let's get rid of these two, they're a family. So you're kind of on your own. Whether your parent is there or not, you're on your own. Let me tell you that the worst thing that can happen to a human being are two things: weather, cold, and hunger. Hunger, how many of you, I mean, you don't have to, how many of you were really, really hungry at some point in your life and you just couldn't get the food and you really started feeling like not yourself? How many of you are ever hungry? Okay. Okay. Well, it's just multiplied times a million, because ultimately you got to get food. Okay. I don't know what the circumstances were, but we were hungry all the time. And when you are hungry, when your body needs food, when you are in such condition that it's ripping you up inside, you lose your mind, you lose your thoughts, you lose your logic, you lose anything. You just want to eat food. And as you know, human beings cannibalized each other when they were in conditions that was no food, and one of them died, or one of them was dying, and so on, and people ate people because of hunger. So this is I don't know if it's human or what, but I can tell you, we couldn't do that because we neither had knives or we weren't on that. We just starved and starved and starved. And starving was one of the worst pains in the world. I was beaten. My all teeth were knocked out. I had marks on my back for being whipped. I was hit on the head with a rubber hose, because I didn't understand when they gave me a command in German and they hit me on the head and I was out. I was a miracle that I was able to survive and continue on. So, when we left Auschwitz, I was separated from my father the first day on the train, and the train went into, remember, we went into Germany, because Auschwitz was still Poland. And so we went into Germany, into Bavaria, and I went from one camp to another. It was 5 different labor camps that I struggled in. There were things that happened in these camps. There was other young kids like me who were lucky to survive. So we kind of bonded in a way, and we tried to stick together, and the Germans wanted to have some fun, so they would tell a couple of us to start fighting, and the winner would get a piece of bread if you won. And this went on for several days, and finally we said, look, let's fight, and then let one of them just give up, and we'll just cut the bread. You know, you just think of things that you create for survival. And there were other incidents. We used to work in a kitchen for the Germans, and in Augsburg, Germany, was a concentration camp, and we had to peel potatoes. All day long we peeled potatoes, moved cabbage, and so we just sit in a little hut, and the potatoes would go to the German soldiers, and the potato peelings went to the prisoners. So we were cutting that and doing this all day long for about 3 weeks. And we got started in the morning at around 6 o'clock. We had to march to this kitchen. And to me, it seemed like it was forever because we were hungry and so on. And one day we decided, because each time we came back to the barracks, the elders would say, why don't you bring back something to us? We're starving to death. And so they kind of talked us in to bring some of these potatoes, cut them, and bring them back to the barracks. Raw potatoes, of course. And so it wasn't the best idea. We would put a little string around our bottom and here, and we would just fill them with potatoes and peelings and carrots, and up to here, you know. And this went on, and the guard that was guarding us was an old guy. Because the young people in Germany went to the front lines, and the home was guarded by older people, the Wehrmacht. They were called the Wehrmacht. And they were all Germans from the old Reich, and they just utilized them to sort of keep peace in the cities. So this poor guy, I call him poor guy because we had to cross these fields of corn to get there. There's like a shortcut. He couldn't carry his canteen. He couldn't carry his gun or his rifle, as he was all weighed down and all kinds of stuff. So when we used to get into this field of corn where you couldn't see, he would give the canteen to one of us. He took out the bullets and gave the tallest guy to carry his rifle. And you can make a comedy in certain things and tragedy. And as I look back, everybody carried something for this guy because he couldn't walk anymore with all this equipment. And before we got out from the cornfields, we gave it all back. He put it back on and went to the kitchen. Anyway, so we did this. So we did start cutting these potatoes and peels and carrots. And so this went on because we used to get back early at night and it was dark. So when we got to the gates, nobody really kind of paid attention because we were let into the camp. Well, one day, the camp commander is there, or someone must have told him, and he was waiting for us at the gate, and we were like full of stuff. And we would give it to our eldest when we went in. And he says, "Oh, look at this. Look how fat you Jews got over one night. Look at these fat little Jews." We started understanding German. And he took us out into the main. They had the lights, and they told everybody to come out. And they had a table. They always had this table. You never wanted to be on this table, and that's where they whipped you. And they told us to unload this food that we stole or taken, and everybody and the eldest had to come up and watch, and we were whipped 25 whips for that. And needless to tell you, a couple of the younger ones didn't survive. They lived, but they didn't survive. And so these were some of the things that I can tell you that was going on, in addition to the hunger and the brutality that was happening to us daily. Again, I was in Germany with these 4 or 5 different labor camps. I coped with it. You'll have to pardon me. I have so much. Your brain is an archive. It's a archive library of everything that happens to you. It never goes away. The things that happen to you now, you'll recall them later on. And so as I talk, when I talk, my story, there's always other things that I could pick up and so on. It's never the same, because that's the way the mind works. And anyhow, we were working in these camps, and the war started very, very, very quickly at that point. The Russians were coming from one side, the United States was coming from another side. And so the Germans decided to eliminate all the Jews, all the prisoners. And so they would herd us, walk us to these camps that had crematoriums in Germany now. Remember, I had left Poland, Auschwitz. And we marched for who knows how long. We looked back, and there were bodies just laying as far as you can see, because people just couldn't walk and they just gave up and died. And finally, we reached a place called Dachau. How many of you heard of Dachau? Okay, Dachau is a famous concentration camp in Germany outside of Munich. And it was used for both international prisoners, soldiers, and of course they were used for the Germans when they were being arrested and herded into these camps. Dachau was the first camp, and so we arrived to Dachau in 1944 and 45, And then the Germans started to, because the United States was moving very quickly, they started shooting into the barracks and tried to destroy it and kill us in that way. But thank the good Lord, one day we're in the barracks and we heard these machines and we heard strange languages, and we didn't dare going out of the barracks because they were shelling us for 3 days, the Germans, but they wanted to destroy us in the barracks. So no one moved. We just laid under these windows until all of a sudden we heard these voices. Nobody spoke English, so they had, of course, the United States had troops from every nationality who grew up in Jewish homes, Polish homes, Russian homes, Irish homes, and so on. So each one would come in and knock on the barracks and say, "You're free, you're free. Come on out." We were scared to death because we didn't identify the United States we had no radios, we had no news, there was nothing. We lived from minute to minute to minute. And so some of the Jewish soldiers spoke a little Jewish, so some spoke then with Russian. Also, let me say, there were many Hungarians, there were French, and so some of these troops would come in and they were volunteered to stay with us and kind of help us to get out of the barracks and tell us that we've been liberated and that we shouldn't be afraid. And that's when the first time I saw the United States troops. They were, to me, the most, had yellow ribbons and pearl-handed. They were the 3rd Armored Division, which if you kids saw the movie Patton, he was one of his, he was the division that liberated us, and they looked like cowboys. They were just amazing, amazing sight. And I can tell you, and they would just give us whatever we wanted, and that was not good because these particular troops gave me chocolates and they gave me all kinds of fat stuff. And so consequently, you don't do this when you starve for a long time. And I developed typhoid fever, which was very serious. And I had to wind up in a hospital in Germany, in a GI hospital. And I believe I was in there for 2-3 weeks, maybe 4, while everything was coming around to the freedom and so on. I also joined a group. Again, I'm jumping from here to here. There was a group of older survivors who wanted to take revenge. And since the German soldiers didn't come to the main street when they were surrendering, they still had their uniform on. And Bavaria has a lot of big forests, very heavily thick forests. So these Nazis would try to get home to these forests. And this group of guys that was formed and I joined, we were laying for them in these woods, and I'm not going to go into details what we did. You know, torture is not a one-size-fits-all. Every nationality, every religion, every human being is capable of doing the same thing to the other human being, whether it's in terms of revenge or whatever. And we didn't do nice things to them either. So I was, again, we were causing a lot of problems, and there was a very high ranked colonel, rabbi in the army, and he went to General Eisenhower, and he says, we got to get these kids out of here because they are causing all kinds of problems. So we can't get the soldiers organized, because the soldiers really helped us. They helped us get even, get the revenge. So we got special dispensation from President Truman and through Eisenhower, and we were allowed to come to the United States in 1945. There's 10 of us, as you saw in the movie. The ship was Frederick Funston, there it is. We came back with the troops, American troops that were just coming from the front lines. And the minute we came into Brooklyn, it was like nothing you could ever imagine. Colorful and people and laughter, and I just came out of, everything was gray and torturous. And people were so kind, and people were so wonderful, both Gentiles, Jews, black, whatever. And whether we just, whoever was just didn't know enough to do for us. And going a little fast forward, we were placed in a reception center in the Bronx. And from that reception center, we were interviewed by social workers, and they asked us, "What do you want to do? What do you want to go? What would you like to be?" At that point, I was 12 years old, 13 years old. And so I said, well, I want to be a musician like my dad was, because that's the way it was in Europe. Your father was a musician. Traditionally, you're going to be a musician. If your father was a tailor, you're going to be a tailor. You had very little choice. So you had to follow family tradition. So my ambition was, of course, I grew up in music. All my uncles played, singer. So music to me was like second nature to me. It was like without hearing it one day, something was wrong. Everybody was either practicing or singing and so on. So I said to my social worker, I wanted to be a concert pianist like my dad was. So they found a home for me in Cleveland. A very, very wonderful lady. Her name was Winifred Fryer, who was a very prominent lady. She was the teacher at Vassar College, and she was an English teacher, and perhaps she was a little more cultured than she deserved for me, because I couldn't even hold a fork and was like a half animal. But she was wonderful, and she tried to nurture me and tried to help me to blend into my new life. So on my first week in Cleveland, I was placed into Patrick Henry Junior High School, and was placed in the 7th grade. Okay, here we start the next survival. That's probably the worst survival of my life, and I must tell you this, kids. There's nothing more cruel than a bunch of kids that don't respect someone different. And they literally tortured me, not in the sense that they wanted to, with the giggling and with the, if I couldn't pronounce something, those days, I don't know if you do it today, we had to stand up and read paragraphs about history, about so on, to see if you studied to read. And so at this one class, it was a history class, and we were covering Massachusetts, and for the life of me, I could not pronounce Massachusetts. So I would stand up and I would try to, I had a broken, I didn't speak English too well, but as I went along, I tried to deal with all of that. And when it was my time to stand up, and I just dreaded it. It was just like, I would get to this name of Massachusetts, and the only way I could say is Massachusetts, and on. I could not pronounce Massachusetts. In other words, that, Indian words and so on. And then you heard the giggling and when I heard that, it just, I came with an attitude because I was so abused. And now I'm in a place that I can somehow not put up with it. And so this went on for maybe a couple of weeks in the history class, and I was very, 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 very frustrated. I told my foster mother I didn't want to go, and I became very difficult to handle. And when this started, I started fighting in Patrick Henry on a daily basis. One day I took on 5 people, and I lost, obviously. This is not a matter of how strong I was. I couldn't give a crap. I just couldn't take it anymore. And so I fought in the cafeteria, I fought everywhere. My life was being destroyed by this new life. And so the principal went to my foster mother, And he said that they can no longer keep me in the class because I was causing all kinds of problems and fights and so on. And so I wasn't allowed to come back to Patrick Henry. And so the next step that I had to do was a place, who knows where Belfair is? Anybody know where Belfair is? Okay. Belfair is in University Heights and right on Fairmount, and that was a place in 45, 46 for orphans, disturbed kids. It was like an institution. And you were guided by cottage fathers, cottage mothers, and you were restricted to a lot of things. So they took me out of Patrick Henry and they put me into this orphanage place, and I wasn't there. I also fought every day, and I just couldn't handle it. And finally, I found my dad, believe it or not. After being here 3 years, I found him that he was also beaten terribly, and he was in the hospital while we were trying to find each other, a lot of people. And so when he was released, finally I found out that he survived, and my foster mother helped bring him in here. And he came here, he remarried, and he married a heart specialist, Dr. Anna Lewin, and they tried to make a life here. He was playing for Ballet Russe. He taught the piano, and he tried to survive. But kids, let me tell you, after you go through what an adult goes through, losing his kids, losing his family, they're never the same. He was never the same. He lived to be 91 in this country. He was, I think he was in his 40s when he came here. And he played all over. He played all over. And, but the memories and the tragedy, he never got over that, and so he suffered until the day he died. And I suffered with him because I didn't want to patronize him, so I said, come on, come on, come on. Anyhow, he came here, and then I was told that I can go and live with him. It was sponsored by the I was sponsored by the Jewish Children's Bureau, and he was sponsored by the Jewish Federation. And so they found a place for him to live, and I lived with him. And after Belfair, I was told I can go to Shaw High School, of which I did. I went to Shaw, and believe it or not, I graduated. And not fighting, it was more, I became more Americanized. Kids were nicer, they were more compassionate, and so I started bonding with some of them. And then I went on to Kent State, and I tried to learn. I majored in music, but I tried to learn. I also went to the musical settlement. I was taught by a teacher, piano teacher, and I became sort of a not bad a pianist. But again, let me tell you, kids, your mind is that you cannot, to be a concert pianist, to be a violinist, to be whatever, you have to practice 4, 5, 6, 7 hours a day. You need to get theory, you need everything. And if you don't, in music or in any other thing, in any other endeavor, whether it's want to be a soccer player, a football player, or you have to practice, you have to exercise, you have to do it. And my mind really wasn't to sit for 4, 5, 6 hours and practice by the mere fact of what I went through, and it was always going through my mind, and I had no patience to sit and practice. But I did manage to become what I'd call a decent musician, and I kind of enjoyed it, of course, but I was tortured with it. And while I was going to Kent State, the Korean War broke out. The Korean War was on, and I was drafted into the United States Army. Needless to tell you, I was shipped to Korea, and I became in a tank. The irony of life. The 3rd Armored Division of Patton liberated me when I was in Dachau in the concentration camps. And where do you think they put me in Fort Knox, Kentucky? It was the 3rd Armored Division that was its headquarters. So I was placed in the 3rd Armored Division as a tanker, which was a tank, very big tank outfit, and I became a tank commander. I became a good soldier. I became a very good American. I became loyal. I became all these things that I needed. I needed, and needed. The Army, I must say, I'm not recruiting anyone here. I'm not trying to tell you it's a wonderful life or whatever. But when you come from a background that is totally destroyed and totally whatever, I got into the Army, I felt like I had comrades with me, I had friends, I was given a machine gun, I was given a pistol, I was given something that I could defend myself and not just stand there and being beaten and abused and so on. So Army did miracles for me. I was like, I can fight back, I can do all these things now that normal people do, and so it changed my whole life. When I came out of the service in 55, 54, I was in tanks in Korea, I was all over the mountains area and so on. I was a different person. I was a different human being. And I hugged the guys when we laughed at each other. We were like brothers. We were a band of brothers, so to speak. We were just bonding together. Black. My best friends were people that weren't even Jewish. Hillbillies thought in those days that Jews had horns. When I first got to Fort Knox, Kentucky, some of the I call them hillbillies, but some of the guys from the mountains, they never met a Jew. But they would ask me, "Where's your horns?" I mean, perhaps not literally, but it was a different world, you know. And we were a whole unit, a whole wonderful unit. And so when I came out, I discovered that my aunts survived, and they came to the United States in 50, and they came to the United States, and of course I went to visit them. And then they told me the terrible tragedy of my life that just revived all over again. My aunts were with my mother in the women's camp in Auschwitz. That's during the And my sister also passed, so she was with her. And at some point, my sister developed an abscess tooth. Needless to say to you, I'm sure some of you had tooth pain, you know, real excruciating pain when you have a toothache or temperature. And there was nothing they could do for her. There was no medication, there was no doctors, there was nothing. So this poor girl had to deal with it, and deal with it. When she finally couldn't deal with it any longer, she started running high temperature, and when they would bring these people out of the barracks, which was almost every 2 hours, in the cold, she would stand and she couldn't keep her head up. And so my aunts and my mother propped her up so she could go back. But one day she couldn't do it, and she collapsed, and she fell to the ground. And at that point, the German guards started to yank her away, and my mother told my aunts that she cannot let her go. And she said, "I'm leaving her. I'm not leaving her, I'm going with her." So my mother went to the gas chambers, the crematoriums, because she was a mother. You'll be mothers, you'll be fathers. God willing, you'll grow up and be mothers and fathers. And just imagine the pain knowing where she was going with her daughter, not to live. And that's how my mother and sister perished in Auschwitz. And again, the ones that witnessed were my two aunts that survived and were with them. And she said one word to my aunt. She said, if I knew my son Ellis, Lutek, my name was Lutek in Polish, if I knew maybe if he was alive, I might have sacrificed my daughter so that I could be with him someday. Now, I'm not making this up, kids. I am not exaggerating. I am telling you exactly how it was told to me verbatim by my aunts. And so my tragedy started all over again. And I just carried this for the rest of my life. And to this very moment, there was nothing more precious to me, as you understand and as you have, than your mother and your parents, especially when you lose them under these circumstances. So I had to go through another part of my life, and that sort of a mental state. And so, look, survival for young people is totally different from adults. We walk a different place. If God forbid, if you get in an accident, you, God forbid, lose a limb, you lose a parent, if you lose anything that's so precious to you, including anything, you'll never be the same than the kid that didn't. You will become totally different. You're going to be a totally different person. You're no longer the normal one that you were. And so you kind of start, and if you have good friends, and if you have good camaraderie, if you have people that are compassionate for you, friends I'm talking about, not relatives, I'm talking about friends. And when something happens, God forbid, to you and your family, and you have to go through this type of a tragedy, be kind to them. Don't let them be alone. That's what happened to me in Patrick Henry. They did not understand. They did not understand. And there was another problem. How much time do I have?
No, you're good.
There was another problem, and you can understand that. When you come out of a terrible tragedy, people want to be kind to you, parents of these children that were with me in school. But they also have a problem by saying, you know, don't get too friendly with this guy Ellis, who was in a concentration camp, because they didn't want their kids to be depressed. And they would be depressed. So consequently, they wouldn't be happy. Because they're depressed, it'll depress the child. And so just be nice, but don't bring them around us. And so I was kind of denied that closeness with my peers because the parents just didn't think it wasn't the best thing to do is to be with someone who's had a tragedy and who may be talking about it all the time and who would be depressing you. So, fast forward, 2015. I was able to, let me go back for a minute, I was able to overcome a lot of these obstacles, these terrible things. And I decided that music was not going to be something that I can do because of the time and the mentality that it would take. So I needed to find something else. And I struggled and struggled, and I was with Warner Brother Pictures. Someone was kind enough to get me a job with them. I was a booking agent, and I had jobs in automobiles. I had all kinds of work. My main thing was I wanted to be successful. I wanted to be someone that I see my other friends, people. So I wanted to learn as much as I could streetwise. College was wonderful. Everything was wonderful. But let me tell you something. Someday you'll have to depend on streetwiseness. You have to know when you're here in school, you have to be streetwise. You have to be focused. You have to know where you are, and so you become integrated in reality. So I came out. I met the most wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Let me say this next sentence I'm going to say to you. My wife, Joan, who is here, right there. We were married. We're going to be married 60 years in December. 60 years. This woman saved my bud. She's an American, born in Cleveland, and met me, someone that was disturbed in so many ways, and disturbed and different from everybody else. And she dealt with it. I tortured this poor woman by my demeanor, by my, I couldn't find a comfort zone. I couldn't find myself. Like every day, if this came up and that came up, and so all these things were mixing with me, and unfortunately, she had to put up with it. And this woman right here, my wonderful wife, is probably responsible for me being here today and not even winding up in jail for some terrible thing of whatever, or something else, being institutionalized. She sort of was my psychiatrist, my psychologist, my best friend, I can't tell you. I wish you, when you meet the one that you will in your life, has that same kind of a thing that I was fortunate to have. And in addition, we were blessed with 3 kids who achieved. My oldest one is Ricky. Where are you, Rick? He's probably one of the best artists and drummers in the United States, that guy right there. And Dennis got his own radio show on WCLV, that's a classical station. He teaches music. He had a great group in the 80s called Boku, and they're appearing at the Rock Casino, and Dennis is playing all over town, and he is a very, very into music and very dedicated to his music, and he's a phenomenal concert pianist. Trust me, not because he's my son. And last but not least is my daughter here, Debbie. She is Broadway, Vegas. She did it all, and she continues to. She manages a woman that she found who was the lead singer, is the lead singer on Broadway to Phantom of the Opera. And she found her, and they've worked, she and her partner together, called New York, and the producers, and they listened to their story, so you need to audition this person. And the producer told him to come to New York, and she did, and they hired her as the leading part in Phantom of the Opera. So you can see I'm very proud of what we were able to achieve under the circumstances of a person that came out of hell and out of a pit of hell. But I always say the best is the last. Those are my 2 grandsons. They both graduated from Ohio State. They are both successful business guys today. They live in Columbus. One is 27, the other one is 22. They are the most wonderful gift that you can get, and they make my days, like they say in the movies, day and day. So I'm so fortunate of this so-called the middle, and hopefully not yet the ending. So you can see that I have a lot to be grateful for. I have not gotten over There was a very famous psychologist that we had to go and see when I was in my foster home, a child psychiatrist. That was part of the criteria. And he would tell my foster mother, he says, don't worry about him now, these kids that survive. Any kids that go through survival, terrible things that happen. They're different. Worry about them when they're in the 50s and 60s because their life is already developed. They went through the trials and tribulations of life. They will be busy trying to work, make a family, be busy raising a family. So all that other stuff is put in the back of that archive I told you, that brain, that thing that we all retain. And that'll all be there, and they'll be busy just trying to deal with their life. But when they grow up and when they get older and there's things quiet down and you're out of business or you still retiring, and you sit and all that stuff comes back. It all comes back. It just never leaves you. And that is the torture that any survivor, whether it's concentration camp. You know, I always say that when you starve here and you starve in Auschwitz, it's the same starving, you feel that same pain. When you're hungry and you're isolated and there's no one to help you and you're hungry and you're cold, it's no different. It's no different. So it never leaves you. It just never ever leaves you. And so I just want to leave you with one thing, that I'm not trying to be a philosopher. I'm not trying to predict and sadden your lives. But you are the future. You are it. Not us, not me. You guys are going to do whatever it takes to do the world. The world is changing. And it's okay. Changes are good, as long as they're good changes. And sometimes they're not good changes, but you adjust. Unfortunately, kids, the Holocaust is happening all over again. It's not a unique thing just to the Germans. It's not a unique thing. You go back in history, there were the Genghis Khans, they were leaders, murderers, and so on. And so no one has a license, and it's going on again. The Holocaust is going on. They are beheading Christians. And I'm not going into religions, and I'm not going in who and how and where. Because it's happening in Russia, it's happening everywhere. People are getting tortured, murdered, because they are of one thing or another. So if you were me, if you were a Jew, in 1939, living in Mayfield Heights, if you survived, you'd go through the same tragedies that we did. So I'm just saying, be focused, be strong, please, because that's what's going to save the world. People like you. Listen, take in the idiosyncrasies, throw them out the other ear. Retain, retain, retain. I love you, and thank you so much for coming. And I will take some, if there is time, I'll take a couple of questions. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Before we get to the questions and answers, I'm sure some of you do have questions. I want to thank Mr. Ellis Lewin and his family and his friends for coming in today. It's always wonderful to hear him speak. He's a good friend, and I hear different stories. I heard 2 different stories today. So each year that Mr. Lewin comes in to share his testimony, I continue to learn. He always says that he doesn't know why he survived. And I've shared with him, I know why he survived. He survived so he could be the testimony, so he could be the living voice of what transpired. And he can educate us so that we know, through Ellis, through Mr. Lewin, what happened. That's why he survived and the other survivors survived. I also want to thank you. I know sitting on your bum for an hour and a half,
Yes.
it's got to be pretty uncomfortable, and I thought you were
You're
remarkably
just beautiful, beautiful
You did a
kid.
great job.
You're the best. You're the best.
I'd like to thank the teachers for making it happen.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the staff for doing what they do. A great job. Thank you so much. Most importantly, I'd like to thank Mr. Lewin. So that's it.
Thank you. Yeah, please do.
Would anybody have a question now for Mr. Lewin? One
Come on, don't be bashful.
opportunity you're going to get.
I got one.
Please.
Well, you survived one of the most horrible atrocities that can't even be described in words, and you came up on top. I decided I ought to bring a gift, so I brought one of my most prized possessions, my one-piece origami eagle, and I thought I would give it to you. That's okay.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
problem.
Let me give you a hug. Look at this.
You know, it's about time I parted with the thing.
No, look at this. Come here.
Let me hold it so you don't
Yeah, that's right. I feel that soul power, man.
Thank you so much. I'm going to cherish this, I guarantee you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Sean, I want to make a comment here. I just want to tell you, it's amazing to see you guys listening to Ellis for the hour or whatever he said. But I want to tell you something. You are in a unique place this morning, because what Ellis said in the beginning is many survivors are not with us anymore. There are many survivors that couldn't even speak about their atrocities. My parents survived camps and they are not with us anymore. They passed away. They would never even talk to me about what happened to them. So you are in a unique place in your lifetime, and I want you to remember it because of two reasons. One of them is you are witnesses to a story of a survivor. And in 10, 15 years, Ellis has a contract for 20 more years to talk about it. You will not see survivors talking about their stories or about their life. So you are witnesses to a survivor, and I hope that one day you'll tell other people that deny the Holocaust, and you'll hear stories about denial when you get to college, that people don't believe that that happened. And there are many people that went through it. Here is a guy that went through hell, came back, rebuilt a life, built a family, has children and grandchildren that are part of society, that get up in the morning and want to make life better for everyone and for our planet. There are many people that get up in the morning, the only thing that they would think about is destruction, destroying life, destroying the planet also. So you are witnesses to something like that, and I hope you take his message throughout your life. But if you are looking for a role model in your life, it's not a basketball player or a football player that has a few years of glory. It's someone like that, like Ellis Lewin, that all his life, rebuilding his life is glory, and someone that can give a message. So I thank you for being here. Hopefully you'll remember him. And before you leave here, give him a hug and take a picture with him, because I want you to remember him all your life.
Are there any other questions? Thank you, Abby. Thank you so much for your words. I appreciate it. Are there any other questions?
I want to say something, okay, so you guys can all listen to this. because you're all on the internet, you're on your iPhones 24 hours a day, I know, just like me. Be careful what you look for on the internet, because there's a lot of websites that are so professionally done to denounce the Holocaust. And if you go, you'll see it never happened. They have photographs and stuff, never happened, whatever. You got to be careful what you're watching and what you're reading, because that stuff is done by professionals, and that's totally false. It's done so well. You have to watch for that. Go to the legitimate sites, are like the Holocaust Museum in Washington and several other ones. But watch out for that stuff, because it's so huge now, the corruption of the Holocaust.
Thanks, Dennis. Thank you so much again. Have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful, wonderful life. And be close with your loved ones, and you'll be okay. You'll be okay. If you have a problem, work at it. Work it out. As long as you stay strong, you'll work it out. And that's what I had to deal with. I had to work it out every day as I do now. That's what life is. It's a constant, I'm not going to call it struggle, but it's a constant that keeps going. It's a constant. It's a constant. And just be happy, and just, I'm not going to tell you to do the right thing or whatever. I'm sure you know what the right thing is, and so on. Respect your other people, respect each other, and you'll be fine. Again, I thank you. I thank the faculty. I thank my buddy Sean, who's just he is one of a kind. He's a crusader of the Holocaust. He's a crusader of humanity. I'm sure it's not just this. When he saw something, he got involved. I mean, all the way. And there's nothing in the world I wouldn't do for him, except giving you my wife, of course. But anyway, he has been a pillar, a super human being. And you should be proud of him, as should the school. Thank you so much. I love you all, and have a great day.
I can always make another one.
Thank you.